Okay, well, it is past, so I think we'll get started. So thank you everybody for joining to our first Psychology in Practice Advanced session. My name is Helen Hargrave. I'm a Senior Consultant within Zircon & Talent. I'm really excited to be delivering this session today with you on an introduction to psychology. So it's our first session, so this should hopefully give you a taster into what's to come in later sessions. So we're going to be focusing today on a couple of different topics in terms of survival instincts and how you can get the best out of relationships and build relationships, and relating that back to the current times that we live in within the COVID-19 situation that we're in at the moment. And so hopefully you'll find it really interesting and engaging, and we've got lots of other different topics coming up over the next few weeks, hopefully, that focus on stress and leadership and motivation and personality. So hopefully this will give you a flavour of what you're in for over the next couple of weeks if you'd like to keep joining us. But we thought it was important to first cover what psychology is and why it's important to understand it and how it applies to our daily life, and certainly in the uncertain times that we're living in at the moment. And so first of all, I just wanted to cover what is psychology and where does it actually come from. And it actually comes from the Greek term psyche and ology. So the psyche being the soul and ology being the study of. And psychology really encapsulates a whole host of things that are really interesting to us in terms of our development, our personality, our feelings, our thoughts, why we interact in the way that we do. So for example, why do some of us prefer a weekend to go out partying when others of us prefer to sit in and watch Netflix? And what are the individual differences, and why do we have these individual differences that are clear to us? And so all over the years, psychologists have tried to unpick and learn more about why these differences occur, and there's lots of reasons as to why different influences might affect us. Some instances might be our biological influences in terms of our DNA, and some elements might be more environmental in terms of the way that we grew up, or the way that we've been nurtured. And so why is psychology important to us in our daily lives? Well, there's lots of different ways that we can apply psychology, but it's really getting to the heart of using psychological research and theory to be able to help us live better lives, to be healthier, to be happier and lead more fulfilling lives. And so what I'd like to explore with you over the course of the next 15 minutes or so is just a couple of different applications that we can use psychology with in as a little bit of a taster. So first of all, I'd like to explore with you how we cope under extreme stress during the current COVID-19 crisis, and why we might act in certain ways in the way that we do, and what's the biological reason for that, and what's the psychological reason, and how can we cope better under those circumstances. And the second area that I'd like to talk to you about is really how we can build relationships in these times and make sure that we're maintaining connections with people as we go through a shift in how we operate in our daily lives. So just before I talk a little bit more about the COVID-19 crisis and how it's impacting people, I'd just like to share a short video clip with you that I found that was quite interesting in terms of how some people are behaving.
Tensions flared at Woolworths Chullora around 7 o'clock this morning when 3 women became involved in a toilet paper tussle.
I just want 1 pack. No, not 1 pack.
Staff rushed to aisle 11 to intervene.
Yeah, it's unfair. You need to stop. Call the police. I'm calling the police.
It's not the Thunderdome. It's not Mad Max. We don't need to do that.
Officers spoke to a 49-year-old woman who told them she'd been assaulted. No arrests have been made, but police are looking for the other 2 women.
It's just bad behaviour by people that are panicking, and there's no need for any of that panic.
Woolworths released a statement saying, "We will not tolerate violence of any kind from our customers in our stores, and we are working with police who are investigating the matter."
This is a time for people to remain calm, a time for Australians to pull together, to work together, to respect their fellow citizens.
Health authorities are urging people not to bulk buy, concerned the elderly and other vulnerable groups will suffer.
There's no reason to have months' worth of supplies at home.
Toilet paper.
And so what this video is really showing to us is people people behaving in extraordinary ways as a result of the crisis. And so what we need to be able to do is to start to understand why that might be. And this behaviour really is explained by psychologists in terms of our survival instincts. So if we think back to earlier times when we were more of a hunter-gatherer, in a more of a hunter-gatherer environment, and more of our ancestors that were more mammalian, the survival instinct comes from a concept called flight or flight, and it's about whether you choose to fight that situation, as in the video where there was that tussle over the toilet rolls, or whether you choose to flee away from it and actually don't choose to engage with that situation. And this comes from basically a build-up of adrenaline in our hormones that's a stress regulator, so it helps us to deal with the crisis that we're currently facing. However, it doesn't help us necessarily to be able to make the most rational decisions, because we get more emotional psychologically, because our heart starts racing, we have rapid breathing, and therefore we can't necessarily deal effectively with the situation in front of us. And so linking this back to COVID-19, what the media have done is what they probably need to be more mindful of, is that they've instilled a sense of fear possibly within the public. And so people therefore go to this natural instinct of avoiding getting ill and protecting their families by going and panic buying and making sure that they're okay, because they've seen images in the media of empty supermarkets and empty grocery stores, and therefore they're worried for their families that they're not able to get the resources that they need. And so what can we learn from this, and what can psychologists help us to do to help us to deal with these situations more easily in the future? Well, psychologists have got numerous, as you can imagine, numerous things that they can help us to help cope with stress, from making sure that we partake in physical exercise, eating more healthily, and coming up with stress management strategies. Two of the most recent concepts that have been brought in are the concepts of psychological safety and resilience. And psychological safety is about giving people the platform and the environment to make sure that they can voice their emotions, feelings and thoughts without being judged. So eradicating a sense of fear within the community, and making them feel like they're not necessarily going to be punished or feel embarrassed for having a certain feeling or towards the current environment that we're facing. In other words, it advocates a sense of what Amy Edmondson in her research calls candour. And this is really about making environments psychologically safe so that they can speak their mind, they don't feel like they're being judged, and therefore they can speak more openly and honestly about how they're feeling. And we see this a lot in our area of work at the moment. So to give an example, a junior doctor noticing that a mistake in a senior doctor and not voicing that, because the environment is that if they voice that opinion, that actually they will get reprimanded for it. So it's really important that we, within our friendship groups, within our families, that we advocate speaking open and honestly to one another, and to be able to enhance that psychologically safe environment. And therefore, by doing that, we are less likely to revert back to those biological survival instincts and dealing with the situation through assessing other options. What can I do in this situation that's more socially intelligent for me, and how can I get the best out of this situation, even though I'm facing an incredibly tough time at the moment, tough situation. And so the next area is developing resilience. And so resilience is about the ability to bounce back. And I know that my colleague Reese is going to be covering this a lot more in the basic session next week, and we'll probably be covering it again in future areas. And it's really about encountering challenges and being able to deal with them more effectively. Resilience is really a skill and a strength that we can use and draw upon to help us deal with stresses that come to us in our daily lives. And so there's two aspects of resilience. The first is about having experienced adverse and stressful situations in the past. And the Centre of Confidence and Wellbeing have done a lot of research in terms of how having the experience of dealing with stressful situations can help us to develop and cope with them better. And the second aspect is developing coping mechanisms to help us grow in those environments in the future. And so what being resilient does is it helps us to achieve emotional regulation. It helps us to build self-acceptance in ourselves, build our self-esteem, and express our emotions more wisely. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavour into survival instincts. I know I've covered that quite quickly. But yeah, hopefully over the course of the next few weeks, we'll be able to explore these ideas and concepts in a little bit more depth. The second area that I'd like to talk about with you is how we can use psychology to build better and maintain better relationships. And in reality, psychology has a lot of different theories and concepts around how we can build better relationships. So we're going to focus on two aspects today. One is why we build relationships with other people, what's the purpose around it, and we're going to focus on one theory called the social exchange theory. And the other is, why does our body language and our nonverbal communication, why does it impact how we communicate with another, and how we can use nonverbal communication to learn more about one another. And again, how do these impact how we are, the circumstances that we are in at the moment, with an increased amount of non-physical communication over Skype or over the telephone, and how that's impacting our relationships and how we can be aware of that. So first of all, why do we enter into relationships and friendships with people in the first place? Well, the social exchange theory, which was come up with by Kelly and Seabolt, is an economic theory, and it's really based around transactions. So weighing up a relationship and checking and balancing it against whether you are getting the right amount of rewards. So are you getting emotional support, companionship, and things like that really benefit you from having that friendship or relationship with that individual. And it's about balancing that with the costs of the time that you might have to put into that relationship, and the stress that it might cause you at certain times throughout that relationship, and any arguments that might occur as a result. So really this theory says that in order for us to get the most out of relationships and to conduct relationships and to have relationships with people, there has to be a balance, and it has to be mutually beneficial for that individual. And so it's very results driven. Of course, it's about the give and take. And so relationships are really key in making sure that there's a balance, and that you're getting what you need and you're understanding your own feelings and thoughts, but also are the other people that you're having relationships with getting that same effort and time. And so an example of this can also be translated into the workplace. So if we take an employer-employee relationship, so if an employee is working really hard but they're not feeling motivated or recognised for their efforts, or they're not being paid particularly well, then this can be less likely to maintain, they might be less likely to maintain their performance in the future. They might be more likely to leave that organisation as a result. And so it's really important that we kind of have that in mind as to why we build relationships in the way that we do. Of course, there's lots of other theories that take a different approach. This is very socio-economic theory. There are other more behavioural models as well, which we haven't got time to talk about today, but which hopefully we will at another time. And so the second aspect of this is really around non-verbal communication. So we use non-verbal communication almost in every aspect of our communications with people. We spend around 75% of our time communicating with one another. 80% of that is usually spending time either sending or understanding non-verbal cues. And so this idea of non-verbal communication came about through Charles Darwin's research in terms of how we express emotions, both in ourselves and also how animals express emotions. And so this research was really extended even further by Membrane and in 1964, and he looked at a model called the Words, Music, Dance model, and it basically concluded that we spend only about 7% of our communication is through the words that we say. About 38% is about how we say them, so the pitch, the tone and the speed. And about 55% is about our body language. So about 90% of what we're saying isn't really coming out of our mouths. And therefore non-verbal communication is really key in conveying empathy, emotions such as happiness, sadness, anger and curiosity. And therefore, if we link this back to the current environment of COVID-19, a lot of the communication strategies that we're using and relying upon now are to do with the words that we say and not necessarily about reading body language, because we're not physically there with the individual. So if I've got a difficult conversation to have with somebody, or I've got to tell somebody a piece of bad news about a family member, I can't actually be there and support them physically. And therefore that has an impact on how we communicate with one another. That's why it's really increasingly important that we use technology such as House Party, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger to be able to make sure that we're keeping that emotional connection wherever we can. And it really highlights the point of the importance of us listening to one another even more and asking active questions to really understand, because we can't be there physically present to kind of feel that emotion. I had actually a conversation with a client a couple of hours ago about the fact that you can't necessarily really get that through the camera because the eye contact isn't the same. You know, you're either staring at a screen or you're staring at a camera, and so even eye contact is really difficult to gauge. And therefore listening to people is really, really key, and finding out, and there are different levels of listening, which is brought to us by the Covey research and the Covey book. So actually we speak about 125 words per minute, we hear about 300 words per minute, and we think at about 600 to 900 words per minute. So we're thinking a lot quicker than we're speaking. So I probably thought about this entire presentation before I've even said the first slide. And so it's really important that we understand how we listen to one another and the different levels that we go through. So the first level is basically ignoring and not listening to that person at all. The second is pretend listening, so listening maybe to certain aspects but not really be engaging with that person. Selective listening is about hearing for the key things that you might be interested in. And then autobiographical is probably the one that we rely on the most, and it's not necessarily wrong or bad. It's probably the one that we rely on the most in conversations where we're not physically present, because it's about hearing how this relates to me and how I can therefore understand the other person's emotion. What we really need to try and do is get into the active listening. And most of us may struggle with this through video conferencing, because we're not necessarily, like I said, we're not necessarily there and we're not necessarily present. But active listening is really, really key. And what we can do is we can break this down into, well, actually, what does active listening look like? And so really it's about looking interested. So it's making sure that you've got that eye contact. It's about inquiring with questions. So a lot of the work that we do is about asking questions, just understand the psychology around people. Managing your eye contact with people wherever possible, and evaluating and testing understanding. So reflecting back and summarising what things people have said. And so hopefully that should give you a summary in terms of why it's important that we observe people's nonverbal communication and how we can implement strategies in the future to help us. I think that's about everything that I've got to say. I think I am just on time. So I was wondering if anybody has any questions or if they had any reflections on that. Okay, I take that as a no. It's been really lovely to speak to you all. The next session will be on next Tuesday, and I think we're going to be focusing on stress and different. Yeah, I think it's going to be on stress and the different techniques that we can use to alleviate stresses. So hopefully you can join us then, and yeah, I hope that you've enjoyed it and that you've got out of the session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you.